All right, there it is. Welcome, 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 everybody. It appears that we have a last-minute cancellation, so sorry, y'all are stuck with me. Hopefully that's not a bad thing. We're going to get in and jump solo poly stuff today, so let's get started. Here we go.
Practicing Polyamory, real-life perspectives from the imperfect people of polyamory. The mission of the Practicing Polyamory podcast is to provide a platform for all of the real-life, flawed humans that practice polyamory so that we might all learn from one another and grow as a community. Enjoy the show.
All right. There it is, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's a little bit cloudy today, but it's still a beautiful day because we're here, we're breathing. Life is good. Before we jump into today's program, I want to quickly remind everybody that we do 3 shows every week and we are open for questions. So if you have any questions about your relationships or if there's a topic you'd like to hear discussed on the show, slide into my DMs and let me know. Follow me on all social medias at Practicing Poly right there. And, hit me up. Don't forget to enable notifications on YouTube, Facebook, and join us for the live recording where you can get your questions answered live on the spot. Throw my little banner up there for that. Right there. And as always, I want to remind you, if you're listening to this podcast, you are a welcome guest to be on the show. We're here to share our imperfect stories, and I want to get as many voices as possible to speak here because I know that the more stories we hear, the more others will see us in themselves, and the more representation we have, the more we can strengthen our community. So go to practicingpolyamory.com and sign up today. All right, that's pretty much all I got as far as all that stuff goes. It's just me, as I said, so maybe I'll get a chance to, throw in a
lot of potential for aggressive expansion.
A lot of potential for aggressive expansion of movie clips. We'll have some fun today. All right. So I took this article from solopoly.net. The author is Aggie Says. You can see it in the title. And it's just rules that this person made up. It says Aggie's rules for Aggie. So I'm going to just kind of go through them, see, what Aggie has said as far as rules for herself. And, my take on all of these different things. So I will start off with the first one that Aggie talks about, which is respect and consideration. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Nothing's going to blow anybody's mind. Respect and consideration, so important. I think one of the differences in solo poly and, basically anything else is as a solo polyamorous person, there's a lot more autonomy, I think, that I carry. And you know what? I'll talk a little bit about kind of my own personal story, where I'm at with when it comes to solo poly. So before I get into the respect and consideration, I'll talk about my journey. I have been, practicing poly since 2016, 2017, so 4 or 5 years, somewhere around there. And, when I started, I was part of a couple, I was married, and my soon-to-be ex-wife and I, whoa, hang on, surprise, I have my guest. Hello, Maria.
Hi. I'm getting a weird, double audio, so.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't know. Oh, I just figured it out. I had the YouTube channel open. I'm sorry. I had the time down wrong.
Well,
so
here
I'm
you
here.
are. And we're live already.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt.
It's all good. You know what? This is even better. I'm going to have to change the title later. But hey, let me introduce you as my guest because we're only 4 minutes in. So, hey, who cares? Let's jump in.
Okay, good.
All right. Everybody, I'm so excited to present our guest today. Today's guest is not just a certified sex therapist who specializes in working with folks in the LGBT, poly, and kink communities. She's also an educator for other therapists who want to do the same. Our guest has developed a certified course on kink, where she teaches other therapists the basics of BDSM, like terms, concepts, and consent, but dives even deeper to teach how mental health professionals have historically done a disservice to sexual minorities. As a certified sex therapist, our guest knows that other therapists must understand what kink-aware, sex-positive therapy is in order for clients to feel safe and heard. Furthermore, our guest knows that society as a whole has a long way to go in destigmatizing and normalizing mental and sexual health care, and she's here to share that message and more. So let's dive in and learn from today's awesome guest, who's joining us from New Directions Therapy out of Lakewood, Washington. Welcome to the show, Maria Carrington.
Quite the intro there. So not to be nitpicky, but I don't have any kind of certification. I do have a course that's available on Simple Practice. But that term certification kind of gets overused a lot of times. Well, and that is one of the things I wanted to talk about too.
Okay, I appreciate that, but I do want to even maybe further clarify. Yeah. It does give 1 hour of continuing education.
Yes, it does.
So that's what I meant by certified.
Yeah. People can purchase that one on Simple Practice. They have a continuing education course, and that I did that last year, and it's been great to get more education out there for therapists. It's just a touch on stuff, though. It's only an hour. So any therapists who want to learn more, there's more stuff out there to dive deeper to.
Cool. Well, what kind of stuff did you want to talk about? It seemed like you had something. You were just getting to it. Go for it. Hit me with it.
Yeah. One of the things that I find as a sex therapist is that there's a lot of therapists out there, and I don't think this is malicious. I think it's just kind of a lack of understanding that will advertise that they do sex therapy. And they don't actually have training in it. It is something that I went through, 150 hours of training on specifically sexual health related and how to do sex therapy. And then I did 50 hours of supervision on top of that with somebody else who was certified longer than me and talked about all the ways to deal with it. So it's really important for people to ask therapist questions, right? If you see on somebody's webpage, I see you do sex therapy, what's your training in it, right? What's your experience in it? A lot of times I think consumers get overwhelmed with the 8,000 acronyms after our names, and they don't know what to ask or it's not being a sex therapist is not a protected term in any state but Florida. So, I can't legally call myself a therapist or a social worker without a certain amount of education and license, but that's not the same for sex therapy.
Got it. So, it is a specific practice, but it's not actually like protected, as you said.
Yeah.
So as you're talking and as you're saying, well, we need to ask, if I'm looking to get sex therapy, I need to ask my therapist what their background is, what their education is in sexual health.
Yep.
What answers am I looking for? I mean, I can ask the question, they can feed me a bunch of stuff, and I have no idea what, up is from down in that case.
So you'd want to be looking for an answer, something along the lines of, I took a training program here, or my graduate program. A lot of the therapy graduate programs like masters in counseling and stuff are starting to offer sub-tracks of sex therapy so they can get the training. I did my training at the University of Michigan, where they have a specific, outside of their therapy program, the 150 hours, and it's a certification program. And just really ask them also, along with what is their training, what is their experience in whatever particular issue you're looking to get help with, right? Have you worked with people with what I'm struggling with, and have you been able to help people who are struggling with what I'm struggling with?
Important things for sure.
I also think an important question to ask a therapist too is, what is their personal feelings around whatever issue you're also looking for help with? Like, this goes into the poly and the kink piece too. Because one of the things that has caused me to get more training in this and do the trainings that I do is, unfortunately, a lot of therapists can do damage when they don't have proper knowledge and understanding about being poly or being kink or certain sexual health issues.
Right.
So.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. In fact, yesterday, I jumped on an interview with friend who is also a relationship counselor, sex therapist. I'm not sure about sex therapist actually, but she's definitely like a relationship person. In fact, she was the person who helped me come out publicly on the internet as polyamorous. She's the one that helped me, you know, publicly announce that.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm listening to her interview, and there's a lot of things that she's biased towards when it comes. There's a lot of biases that she's carrying when it comes to polyamory that, you know, as much as I'm grateful to her for, you know, helping me tell my story, you know, I wonder if she's got the right information. So when it comes to these biases, I feel like this is definitely a big thing that therapists would have to shed.
Yes.
Tell me about those biases and how they carry into most of common therapy.
Well, it's something that I think schools are just now starting to kind of train therapists around looking at, right? And I think we live in such a heteronormative, monogamy normative culture that a lot of times I think therapists have these biases that they're not even aware of. Right. The most recent version of the diagnostic and statistical manual that we use to diagnose people, you know, finally this version that's only several years old makes it so that you can't diagnose somebody with a paraphilia who engages in BDSM behavior if they're not distressed by it. Right.
And is that the DSM? Is that the like the psychology Bible, so to speak?
It's the DSM-5.
Holy cow.
Right. You see how thick it is.
Yeah.
Right. But this version, before this, you could be diagnosed with a paraphilia if you were kinky, and no matter what the therapist thought or said, or no matter how you thought or saw it as a behavior, it automatically gave you a mental health disorder. Right. And so the bias is real in the sense that it's not been that long since some of these things have changed.
Got it.
Right. And now to diagnose somebody with a kink, they have to be distressed by it. But there's a lot of room for interpretation in what that distress means. Right. And so I've still heard from clients in the last couple of years that a previous therapist shamed them about it, or, you know, told them, well, I think this is the problem that you have, and this is what we need to work on. And the person's going, but no, I came to speak to you about my depression, not my kinky relationship. You know.
Gotcha.
It's worse. It's so much worse.
So much worse.
Yeah.
So those are the things that as soon as they see that as being part of someone's life, it's like this, oh, I'm putting them in this box.
Yep.
And this is the real issue that we need to work on. Isn't it true, though, that kink is actually sometimes helpful in therapy? Like, it can be therapeutic.
Well, it can be therapeutic. It can be the interesting thing on a lot of the research on kink is that people will set out to do research, and they'll have, you know, when you're doing a research project, you have a hypothesis of what you're going to find. Right. And a lot of times the hypothesis is that people who are kinky will have had a history of sexual abuse, or people who are kinky are going to have lower relationship satisfaction.
Okay.
And what most of the research finds is the opposite. Right. You know, that like there's not a high correlation between being kinky and having a history of sexual abuse, and that there's, you know, that the relationship satisfaction actually a lot of times is more is higher than general pop.
I bet that throws therapists for a loop sometimes.
It does. It's interesting. The research is getting more prominent now than it used to be, you know, but before that, it was even hard for people to get, you know, grants. Dr. Eli Shuff that you had on earlier, like she had talked about that in some of her books about like how hard it was to even get approval for some of her research.
Yeah. Until it becomes something
super common.
Yeah. Yeah. We start seeing it more and more and more and more. But
yeah,
I
think in the last 10 years, being poly or kinky has become a lot more common. And so I think a lot of these organizations and institutions are kind of having to catch up, you know, and make sure that they're, you know, like I am teaching an intro to sex therapy class in the fall at Lewis and Clark College, and they want me to include information in that course about being kinky and being poly, you know, so things are improving, but you still have a lot of people who went to school when that wasn't the case.
Where does polyamory fall in like the DSM in, diagnostic as some kind of disorder or anything along those lines?
It is not diagnosable. It hasn't been diagnosable. But that doesn't mean that if you go to a therapist that doesn't have experience in it and you say, I'm struggling in my poly relationships, or I have these poly, the common scenario I hear is, I'm poly, I've been for 15 years, it works really well for me, but I'm struggling with depression. I'd like to talk to you about the depression, but I'm just telling, the therapist all of me, and the therapist says, well, it must be because you're poly.
Right.
Or, well, why don't you break up with your girlfriend and see how you feel? And there's never just this assumption of like, maybe this works for people. Maybe this is like a good norm for them.
Yep.
So
it's all very true. I've been lucky so far. The therapist that I got, she actually does acknowledge, affirm. She's not judgmental, and this isn't somebody that I went to who is specifically poly friendly. Somebody that I got through my insurance, and I've just been lucky so far. The subject that we were going to talk about was normalizing intentional sexual and mental health. So let's kind of dive into that a little bit. You mentioned it as something that you are passionate or obsessed about, or something that you would want to talk about. So give me your thoughts on the ideas here of normalizing sexual and mental health.
I think that it's really common, be poly or kink or not, to have some kind of sexual health problem as we go through life, right? And it may be, erectile dysfunction, or it might be as simple as you're in a relationship with somebody and your sex drives are not on par, right? Like that's probably one of the most common things I deal with couples. But because people have internalized shame about it, and there's this idea that a therapist means there's something wrong with you or that you're broken, people typically wait to seek help until things are falling apart.
Right.
And if couples specifically sought help, when things are better, I can be a lot more effective. Right. Unfortunately, a lot of couples wait until they're kind of in what I call the like, I hate you and I wish you were dead stage. Right. And there's just not a lot, there are some therapists that are specifically trained to help you decide if you should stay together or break up. But that's not what somebody like me, that's not what most couples therapists are trained to do.
What is it that you're trained to do?
Try and help fix and repair a relationship.
Okay.
And if you're so far apart, it's so hard to get to a fix or repair.
Right.
So
a big part of it is getting to it early.
Looking at it like maintenance versus a broken thing, right? Like, most people the theory is that we go to a doctor once a year for a physical. I know that's not as common anymore as it used to be, right? But like trying to do that blood work before symptoms would show up.
Right.
And most therapists are going to really want to work with you as well, because those are the clients that we like working with. And they're not the ones that leave me feeling so exhausted I have to go home and take a nap.
Right.
So
let's say that I'm in a relationship and it's pretty good, right? My relationship, there aren't really any major problems, little things here and there like any. Now is a good time to start going to therapy if I, intend to be with this person for a long time. And how often should we be doing that? Should we be doing couples therapy? Should we be doing individual therapy? Both?
It depends on what the issue is, right? Like if you don't feel like you have depression or anxiety or PTSD, right? And it's just like maybe little rubs are coming up in the relationship, or you're noticing a pattern that you're getting into with communication, right? That's the time to get into the couples therapy. Right. And if it's not, I see a lot of couples once a month, and they call that kind of their maintenance, right? Or their check-in time, where they're just talking to me about, like we had this fight and I walked away from it feeling this way. And then they talk about how to improve it. And then a lot of times those couples start to also become on an as needed basis. Right. They only see me if something comes up.
Gotcha.
A lot of those couples have been seeing me more frequently over the last year and a half.
Gee, I wonder why.
Yeah, COVID's been quite a stressor.
For sure.
But that just trying to be proactive about it, people are going to be a lot, your effort is going to be greatly rewarded.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, so I'm definitely I'm thinking of it in terms of like, a car. Every 3,000 miles I go in to get my oil change, and I can take it in somewhere, or I can go to the AutoZone and pick up all the stuff and do it myself. Right? So in that same sense, I've got tools like the Multi-Amory podcast. They did the radar, right?
Yep.
So my partner and I, we can do our monthly check-in on our own. And it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong here, it sounds like you're saying if we're doing that and everything's fine, I don't necessarily need to go see a therapist or anything like that.
I think it's more if you're starting to notice patterns, or a lot of times what I see with couples is they have the same argument over and over and over again. And it's never really about, like they might be arguing about the ketchup bottle, but what their actually underlying thing is like, I don't feel like you're hearing me. Well, I don't feel like, and it's that repeated pattern. It's like to break that kind of thing.
Got it.
Right. Because I think early on in relationships, or for the first 10 years of relationships, those can become like a not that big of a thing. And then all of a sudden it increases and gets worse.
Yep. So it sounds like you're really talking about couples that nest together, that live together, that are married, that are sharing a lot of these things. But a lot of folks, especially in our polyam world, we have different kinds of partnerships. We're not necessarily on those relationship escalators. So go ahead.
A lot of people I see are married couples and kind of like cis normative, some, lesbians and gay men as well. But I also see a fair number of, closed Vs, quads, triangles, and the nice thing about how online we are, it's been easier to kind of see those folks too.
Right.
But that can be super helpful when there's conflict kind of in a polycule, and just to try and kind of help. The thing I see the most in those is like there's a communication difference, right? Everybody's trying to communicate, but the way they're communicating is not translating perfectly. And a lot of times I end up being the translator to kind of help bridge that gap.
Nice.
So.
Yeah, I mean, it totally makes sense how I might have, a really good relationship, really good communication with my partner, but if it's a V or a quad and I'm not necessarily super, involved with the other members, or romantically involved with the other members, the communication styles will just be different.
Yeah. And like I've seen a number of scenarios where like everybody in the group's generally trying to communicate. They just have different styles, or different family of origin things that make it so that the way they communicate isn't working for this scenario.
Got it. I'm curious if you can share like a particular experience where you had, some sort of a polycule. They were coming to you. Maybe it was like two metamorphs who weren't getting along, or something along those lines, and kind of how you help bridge that gap.
Yeah, one thing that I've experienced a couple of times is in kind of a quad where there's two couples and there's relationships kind of going, trying to draw it in my head, but like bi-directionally, but then there's conflict between two people in the couple that aren't romantic together. And that's been a common scenario, kind of that metamor problem. And it's really been about just kind of being that bridging the gap on the communication of going, like what I think this person's actually saying is, and then helping them. Like I start by teaching, like hearing what the gap in the communication is. And then eventually I'm teaching them how to talk to each other too.
Right.
Right. And that I think can save a lot of heartache and a lot of pain.
Heck yeah.
This is not an easy lifestyle to engage in.
What did somebody say? Somebody said polyamorists like to play on hard mode.
Yeah. Right. I mean, like relationships, right? Like the hell is other people, right? And then polyamory, like you're multiplying the people, and sometimes it can be great, but sometimes it can be really hard.
For sure, for sure. Do you see any like common struggles? Do you see any patterns, I guess, in the clients that come to you, like the specific things that they're dealing with in their polyamory?
I'd say the most common thing I see are couples who've already been struggling and decide that a good solution to their struggle is to become polyamorous.
I bet you that works all the time.
Yeah, and then somebody's jealous, somebody doesn't want to do it anymore, and they never had a conversation about kind of relationship guidelines, or for lack of a better term, rules, and somebody's violated that. That is the most common thing I've seen. I will say it's shifting a little bit into kind of navigating like the relationship designs too. I'm seeing more of that where couples that are wanting to not be like unethical unicorn seeking folks, where they want to have a third, but they want to do it well, and they've found a third, and they just need some help. But unfortunately, it is the couples normally where everything's hit the fan, and they're like, "Oh my God, what did we do?"
That's not the time. That's not the time.
Every once in a while, I get a couple that comes to me that has been together, married or not, for a long time, that want to open up. And those are my favorite to work with, because they can, I have the knowledge to really help them get there in a smooth way. And there's always things that I can't prepare them for that are going to happen, but I can prepare them for a lot of it. And it's a much smoother transition from monogamy to non-monogamy that way.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Do you see, one of the things that you talked about was in the last, I think you said 10 years or so since the last revision of the DSM, that kink was removed as a disorder automatically. And so it strikes me that, the patterns that we're seeing is that polyamory, kink, and other alternative lifestyles are becoming more and more popular. And as you were explaining the issues and the things that you're seeing with your clients, it almost seems like you're starting to see less of the, hey, we want to open up, or we're opening up wrong, or whatever, and more of like the real, like, nitty gritty of
how do we
polyamory.
Make this work?
How do we make this work?
Yeah.
I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on what you're seeing, I guess, kind of like in society, in your clients. Has there been growth in polyamorous?
Yeah, I really think there has been. I think that there's been, when I first started doing this, the only book that was really out was The Ethical Slut, and then Tristan Tarnio's book came out, and then More Than Two came out. But I think until the last couple of years, that was always looked at as especially More Than Two was looked at as this Bible of like, this is how you do it. Right. And that if you're having a problem, it's because you're not doing it right. And I think the more recent books that have come out, and the more recent folks that are talking about this stuff, it's like, maybe there's a problem in the way you're doing it. Maybe there's a problem in the expectations. Maybe there's a problem in like the guidelines. Like, let's really take a deeper dive into see like, how do you make this work for you as an individual or a group, right? How do you, how do you really expand upon figuring this out, instead of just kind of going like, well, you don't fit the mold, so you're not doing this right.
Yeah, I mean, over and over and over again, it's like there's no one way to do it. But I think that we are, as a community, as people who want to do things the same way, like we start to come up with things that are acceptable versus non-acceptable, and or unacceptable. And I guess I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on like what you see as some common things that people are saying, yeah, no, we definitely don't want to go that way. You mentioned the unicorn hunting, right? And then other things that are like, yes, we want to make sure that we promote more of this.
Yeah, I mean, a common thing I've seen in the last couple of years is a push towards kitchen table polyamory.
Okay.
Where there is a lot of transparency and discussion. I personally think that's a hard bar to meet, because everybody really has to be able to show up and have like hard adult conversations. Right? And sometimes that's just not going to happen within your polycule of people, and so figuring out like, how do you be flexible with it? The other thing that I've seen over the last couple of years that's kind of interesting is I've worked with a lot of younger folks that, you know, as they were coming of age, just assumed they were going to be polyamorous and that this was the lifestyle for them. And they've tried it and they've realized that, like, actually they're a lot more comfortable in monogamy. And there's some like shame and internalized, like, but this isn't the right way.
Got it. Yeah.
You know, there's been some research on what they call the mono-poly wars, you know, where it's this idea of like one is better than the other. And people are often surprised when I'm like, no, it's okay if you don't want to be polyamorous. Like, especially since I advertise it on my webpage, you know, that these are folks I work with. It's like, it's not going to work for everybody, you know, but it's important that you know, it's awesome that you tried it and you figured this out young. Yeah. Right? That you didn't try it forever and be unhappy.
Yeah. It goes back to that monogamy by choice, not monogamy by default.
Compulsory. Yeah, exactly. You know, not just because that's the only thing you ever taught, you know.
So are you seeing that more and more young people are being taught about polyamory? I think that the younger generation is seeing it, learning it way sooner than I did.
Way sooner. And then also sometimes they're not. I've had on more than one occasion where I'll be talking to somebody and they'll be like, well, my girlfriend this and my boyfriend that. And I'll be like, oh, are you polyamorous? And they're like, what? Like, they don't even have that kind of lens to see it through. And that's when I feel very old. You know, where
I'm sorry, I'm using big words.
Well, or when they, you know, for them, it's just normal, right? Like their social circle, it's just a normal thing to have multiple partners and to, you know, not label it as such. Especially more within like the queer community, I've seen that, you know, where the lines are definitely more flexible. So.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah, people don't have to wait till their 50s anymore, you know.
Thank God, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Maria, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you for jumping in. You know, even if it was a little bit late, I was gonna do something boring and like read from an article. So, you know, I'm so glad that you popped in when you did. We were able to still have our chat today.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, where can people find you if they want to get a hold of you, work with you, talk to you, etc.?
Easiest way to reach me is nwsextherapy.com. And I can work with anybody who's physically located in Washington State, because that's the only state I'm licensed in. I also sent you the link for a sex webpage where if you want to find a sex therapist, you can go on there and put in your zip code and it'll bring up anybody who's certified in your area as well.
And tell me really quick, why is it important that somebody looks for a sex therapist specifically?
So you want to look for a sex therapist if you're struggling with any kind of sexual health issue where it's, you know, pain with sex, you know, ED, or your partner, you know, if the crux of your problem in a couple is sex where somebody wants it more, somebody wants a different kind of sex, you know, a sex therapist is really going to have the training to help you with that versus a regular couples therapist or just a regular therapist.
Got it.
So a common thing I see a lot of couples with is what we call mixed orientation, where one person wants to be kinky and one person doesn't. So helping couples kind of navigate that.
Got it.
But going back to what we talked about in the beginning, if you go see a regular couples therapist for that, a lot of times they're going to tell the kinky person, well, you just need to not do that, or, you know, what's wrong with you for wanting to do this stuff?
Yep. That's not going to work. That's not going to work.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right. Well, Maria, again, I want to thank you so much for spending part of your day with me here today, sharing your insight, sharing your knowledge, and, you know, fighting to normalize our sexual and mental health along with me here.
Yeah. Yeah. Nice to meet you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, as always, to our live audience for tuning in today. As a reminder, when we're live, you get no commercial interruptions, but the same can't be said for those podcast downloads. So if you want to avoid the commercial interruptions, be sure to catch us live Monday through Wednesday right here at 2:30 Pacific time, or sign up for our Patreon where you'll get access to our commercial-free RSS feed and support the show. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, wherever it is that you download your podcast if you haven't already, and please leave us a review. We'll really appreciate it. That is all we've got for you today. Thank you once again to Maria, and for all the rest of you, as always,
have a nice day.
Thank you for tuning in to the Practicing Polyamory podcast. Would you or someone in your polycule like to be a guest? Sign up at practicingpolyamory.com and join the conversation. Please support us by subscribing, liking, and following us on social media at Practicing Polya by clicking any of the affiliate links on our website or by subscribing at patreon.com/practicingpolya.